Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's launch for Gregory Ledbetter's beautiful new Nine Arches collection, Maskwork. Thank you to everybody joining us live on YouTube for this evening's event. It's wonderful to see so many of you, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here tonight with Isabel Dixon and Patrick McGuinness reading as special guests alongside Gregory this evening. A huge thanks to everybody turning out to join us. I hope that you have pulled yourself up a comfy chair, have poured a good drink, and are looking forward to enjoying us this evening for what should be a really wonderful, incredible event. These are mysterious, magical, and enrapturing poems. So I'm very much looking forward to introducing this event tonight. I'm Jane Kemain from Nine Arches Press. I'm Greg's editor and publisher, and we're absolutely delighted to be broadcasting live across the digital airwaves to you this evening. So thank you for joining us. So without further ado, just to explain a little bit about how tonight's event will work. We've got a reading from Gregory to finish, but we also have readings by Isabel Dixon and Patrick McGuinness, and we're going to have a Q&A at the end as well. So if you're watching on YouTube, please do think if you have questions that you'd like to ask any of our poets this evening, please enter them into the chat bar on YouTube, which is just on your right hand side. You should see scrolling chat. Please do join in as well. We do read them, and it's really lovely throughout the event to get that feeling of our audience out there. We hope that you're all keeping safe and well, and it's really important, especially at the moment, to be able to connect with audiences. So it's a real delight to have your comments and your conversation. It makes us feel like we're in that lovely, warm, comfortable, bright room filled with noise and people and celebration. So please do contribute. It's lovely to hear you and to read your comments. So this evening, our first reader will be Patrick McGuinness. To tell you a little bit about Patrick, Patrick McGuinness is a poet and a novelist. He wrote The Last 100 Days, which was longlisted for the Man Booker Prize, as well as Other People's Countries, A Journey into Memory, which won the Duff Cooper Prize, and Throw Me to the Walls, which won the World Society of Literature's Encore Award 2020. He's the author of 2 books of poems, The Canals of Mars and Jilted City, which are both available from Carcanet, and the pamphlet 19th Century Blues from Smith Dorstop. He's currently working on a new collection of poems, and we've heard that he also sometimes shows those to Greg. So will you please welcome our first reader this evening, Patrick McGuinness.
Thank you very much. I'm really grateful to Jane, and I'm grateful to Greg as well, because you're both treating me as if I was still a poet, which is what I wanted to be. And I'm now going to try to read some of the recent poems that I've been composing with a view to maybe re-becoming a poet, in no small part thanks to Greg's encouragement. And I'd like also to congratulate him and raise a glass to him for his fantastic book, which is very typically Greg. That is to say, it's incredibly inward and felt and eloquent, but also it always seems to be coming from a place in the culture that we've forgotten really to look for, and that we've not necessarily trained our eye upon. He sees the unusual in the everyday. And it's a great privilege to be reading with him. The first poem, which isn't really a poem, that I'm going to read is about what it's like to not really feel that one is a poet, but at the same time to know that no poet feels like they are poets. Maybe that's got something to do with the mask. It's called Poetry. In Singing in the Rain, Debbie Reynolds plays a woman with a good voice who replaces the beautiful silent screen star, Lena Lamont, who is grating and vulgar and is about to be vocally unmasked by the arrival of sound. The elocution lessons don't work and she can't lip sync. You can't teach class, the film tells us, and class is authenticity. Later, I found out that Jean Hagen, the actor playing Lena Lamont, had the good voice, the better voice, and it was actually her voice they used when Debbie Reynolds pretended it was her voice, pretending to be Lena's. The dubbing had been dubbed back to source. I was never sure what there was to learn there, but now it strikes me as a pretty good definition of poetry. You start out silent, then borrow another voice and try to fit it to your mouth. It doesn't work. You keep trying until finally, yes, there it is. You have your own voice. Ah, but now it's the mouth that's no longer yours. For some reason, I think that's a good expression of how I feel most of the time when I'm writing poetry. I've got the wrong voice, the wrong mouth. This is a poem about the cooling towers of Didcot. I used to think that I was the only poet ever to have written about Didcot, but increasingly more and more Didcotian poets seem to be emerging, like late romantics. And this is my contribution to a burgeoning genre, let's call it. The cooling towers of Didcot. It was the inattentive eye that saw them best. Breeze-block vases with their tapered waists, their smoky pouts. They were modest, middle distant. They had the permanence of grey things, seen but rarely noticed, or, if noticed, only once. When the dynamite sapped them, a ripple climbed their flanks. Their mouths were trying to say something difficult. They hesitated, as if falling was a choice. But when they fell, they sleeved their outlines, peeled themselves off the air that wouldn't quite let them go, that even seemed to try to hold them up. They did their best to go unnoticed, even now, though crowds had gathered, the local news, a man who worked there and who thought them beautiful, who cried in the same reticent way they fell, and the developers whose view they'd blocked. Then they crashed silently into smoke and dust, followed by their noise, which arrived too late. One of the things that my life has involved is spending a lot of time in really banal hotels, which provoke in the traveler a certain kind of bleak consciousness. And this is a poem called Travel Lodge. I actually wrote it originally in French, which is my mother tongue, and I always have to preface it by saying, in French, Travel Lodge is a, how do I say, this is a chain of, let's call them, dirait-on, pragmatic hotels in Britain. You, of course, know what a travel lodge is. I know what a travel lodge is, perhaps too well, as you'll see from this poem. Travel lodge. You wonder who designs these places. You find them off roundabouts after circumlocutions of motorway. They are a way of never getting to the point. Perhaps you have an interview nearby. And that is why you drove here, this reef of dormitory coral on the outskirts of a town that looks just like the one you left. Perhaps you have no more interviews, and that is why. Perhaps you're reapplying for your old job as a husband or a wife, a mother or a father, or for a new one as the same in a startup where your skill set is required. Maybe the startup's you. You've packed a half bottle of something strong, proof against sleeping badly, or maybe too well. You settle like the coffee granules in the single portion sachets in the breakfast room. Even in the slow race to the bottom of yourself, you seem to have come last. The mirror watches you unpack your endless, shallow bag, its well of lonely clothes. The television is a furnace burning local news. You are breathing wardrobe air. The plastic kettle rages and wants to know who's there. This is a poem called Toffs and Tufts. This is about a flat very near my house here in Oxford. It's based on the famous photograph of very posh school kids with less posh school kids looking at each other. It's an attempt to replay the class war using only pigeons. There's a dovecote, tidy as a dollhouse, on the third floor balcony of our street's last slice of council flats. Perspex sidewalls and little porches where thoroughbred pigeons air their plumes and live their show-home lives. Dieted and groomed, they take supplements, wear ankle rings, have names. On the railing facing them, the city pigeons eye them up. They eat shavings of kebab, curbside macerations of burger baps and rain. Their feathers are greasy, lubed with bin juice and exhaust fumes slick, and their necks, when they turn and catch the light, are the rainbows in petrol station puddles. Their bubblegum claws are ringless, stumped at the knuckle, leprous, cropped, nobbled. Some have punctured eyes and threadbare tails from scrapes with cats. They have a ragged irony about them, a street-side swagger as they lounge and watch their overbred cousins gentrify the air. They're on opposite ends of what it is to be the same, like the famous photo of posh schoolboys outside Lord's with their top hats, carnations and canes, while the local kids, mitching from school, more interested than envious, peer at them across the species gulf that isn't one, from the other side of the nature that's all nurture. This is my last poem. Have I got time, Jane? Thank you. This is called Prose Between Stations. I thought I would top and tail this with poems that are not really poems, but that are about the anxiety that attends upon writing poetry. Prose Between Stations. This is about where I come from. Not a train, by the way, Belgium, but it's set on a train. Prose Between Stations. Things seen, heard from the top floor of the Brussels-Luxembourg Intercity Express. Only the train is fast, because life inside and out takes place in some other zone of time, as thickly weightless as footage of an astronaut cooking breakfast between planets. At Cine, a bull nonchalantly mounting a cow, this is outside the train, as the cow grazes on, pestling mouthfuls of grass with a slow swing of her jaw. She chews in time to his slack thrusts, each one hovering effortfully at the edges of itself as if pulling into and out of Velcro. This is the middle distance, with neither the prestige of the far away nor the imperiousness of foreground. The whole scene depends on the train's speed, which allows the traveller, forehead laid refreshingly against the glass, to pick out with a distinctness and granularity that is at first disproportionate to its interest, but which, of course, quickly becomes its interest. At Ottigny, students from Louvain-la-Neuve climb aboard with backpacks full of laundry for their mothers to wash. It's a journey of 20 minutes undertaken with a month's worth of clothing. They're equipped to emigrate, but instead they descend, as they always do, 20 minutes later at Jean Blou, where 3 workmen off the day shift at a zinc plating factory step on and talk about their friend who hanged himself yesterday, the evening of the burial of his wife, dead last month from a pulmonary thrombosis. At Namur, 3 kindergarten teachers replace them seat for seat, discuss the school's Christmas decorations, affectionately mention a troublesome boy they like, but whose life is in danger of going. One of them searches for the right phrase, then with a little laugh, gestures around her and says, with a sort of embarrassed satisfaction, off the rails, then settle down to comparing different brands of sleeping tablet with the discrimination and adjectival range of sommeliers discussing vintages. The sky is a mild, uninsistent grey, streaked with oily-looking damp, like those little cloths they put on headrests of armchairs in old people's homes. This is all raw material, and it thinks of all the contortions it would have to go through to become a poem, and it decides to stay as it is, nondescript, if not undescribed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick, for a wonderful reading that took us from the late romantics of Didcot on a circumlocution via stations to different poetry destinations. It was a real treat to hear you read. Thank you. Our next reader this evening will be Isabel Dixon. We've been really fortunate to have worked with Isabel over her recent collection, Bearings, and to have also reissued some of her previous collections as well. And to tell you a little bit more about Isabel. Isabel grew up in South Africa, where her debut collection, Weather Eye, won the Olive Schreiner Prize. Further collections, A Fold in the Map and The Tempest Prognosticator, recently reissued by Nine Arches, were described by Jem Coetzee as a virtuoso collection and have been reissued recently. Her work has been recorded for the Poetry Archive, and she collaborates with artists, writers and composers. Her most recent collection is Bearings, which was published by Nine Arches Press in 2016. In the same year, Mariscat published her pamphlet, The Leonids, and Isabel is working on a new collection with Nine Arches for 2022. So we shall look forward to that very much. Would you please give a warm welcome to Isabel Dixon?
Thank you, Jane, and thank you, Greg and Patrick, also for that introductory reading and going first. I'm thrilled to be here. I hope everyone at home is thrilled, or wherever you are, thrilled to be here, sitting comfy, wherever you're Zooming or YouTubing from, but also feeling a bit fizzy and celebratory, a bit launch ready, because I'm very excited about this book, and I'd rather be reading here with this in front of me. It's such a beautiful book and such a stunning looking book, as well as the beautiful poems inside. And I first heard Greg read, I think, at a Nine Arches Jamboree some years back, not in my study like this one. And I'm very, very much looking forward to hearing him read some of those beautiful, supple, mysterious poems from Maskwork. And I've been thinking about Maskwork and thinking about how it ranges through form and through different forms. And I thought I might turn as my first poem to a quartet of stanzas from Bearings. And these are, if you look at the page, there are these sequence of 4 7-line stanzas that are scattered throughout the collection, which all are an assemblage really of echoes and snatches and scatterings, things I've overheard, snatches of songs that somehow make some kind of sense to me, made some kind of sense to me at the time, and maybe sometimes still do, different kinds of sense perhaps, reverberations that are different at different times. And when I was looking through it, this particular double page spread seemed to have some melancholy resonance for our shaky and shaken times right now. Each of the quartets, the stanzas, begins with an italicized phrase, a leading phrase, which forms a kind of title, and each one begins with "in which." In which I am given a very wide berth. Not quite the madwoman in the attic, just give me time. Up here in my eyrie, penning my memoirs in lemon juice. If you turn up the heat, all will be clear. I'm practicing to be the invisible wife. The best sort of woman, you might say. A deep vocation, one of the subtlest arts, a job for life. In which it's all a jolly fine mess. Just like the time you left the Risk out in the rain and all of Europe turned to mush. I never liked that game, the glint you got at Lebensraum. I'd rather be the Scotty going to jail, and I've served my time. Professor Plum's a dismal footnote now, that sorry, slogging pawn will never make the crown. In which you feel the scorch of industry. Can you feel the draft in here? It chills the spine to think of all the little seamstresses, that fire, a river of cloth, beware the spark, humming at singers, busy little treadle feet, and oh, sewing sisters, mark that twist of smoke. They have locked the doors to keep you safe at work. in which the Amazon does not appear. How far the drifting berg is from the wadi, never the twain, yet give it time. Track the furrows of my brow, back to the dongas of my youth, ford the drift, die in the sluit. Explorers once, we're washed up duffers on this pinchbeck island now, another carving coast. And again, thinking of those masks, the masks of theatre, the different identities and masks, and the drama and that we find in the collection Maskwork, I thought I would read a theatre poem. There's a poem in The Tempest Prognosticator called So Many Henrys, and it's both a nod to the Henrys, the history plays, Shakespeare's history plays, which is when I wrote this particular poem during an extraordinary experience of seeing all of the history plays, well, seeing the sequence when all of the history plays were being performed in Camden at the Roundhouse. And that Shakespearean language burned into my mind. It's also a nod to John Berryman, who was a great lover of Shakespeare, an expert on Shakespeare, and whose key character in the Dream Songs, which I love, is of course called Henry. So there are references here to the long jars of York and Lancaster, a time in which England was much divided, and a word that I actually found in Berryman, tinchel, which is when hunters close in a circle on their prey, if you're wondering what that word is when I reach it. And the upstart crow is, of course, an insult thrown at Shakespeare, one of his jealous rivals. So many Henrys, thou upstart crow, glove maker's son, what a world is this you've made? What right have you to break our hearts so, foundering nightly on the reefs of your tempestuous stage? How could you know so well our joint and secret griefs, the schisms national, long jars of York and Lancaster, and of our several selves? From the heavens to the cellarage, blood's old parade, the tinchel closes on the victim, brothers plot harm, war issues from a mother's rage. Son who has killed his father, father who has killed his son. All Falstaff's merriment can't wipe this from the page, nor right the wrongs we've done to those we love. Do we learn, rent by these scenes, or is it bootlessly we burn? If this whole globe goes up in flames, then God have mercy on the man who seeks to build it up again. And then another poem from The Tempest Prognosticator, which is a book with many creatures in it. And perhaps this is my answering primate poem to your ape poem in Maskwork, The Ape at the End of the World. I thought I needed to find a creature to end my reading with before we hand over to you. This is a primate love poem called You, Me, and the Orangutan. Forgive me, it was not my plan to fall in love like this. You are the best of men, but he is something else, a king among the puny, gentle, nurturing. Walking without you through the zoo, I felt his gaze, love at first sight, yes, but through the bars, alas. Believe me, though, it's not a question of his size. What did it for me were his supple lips, those melancholy eyes, that noble furrowed brow. His heart so filled with care for every species and his own, so threatened, rare. How could I not respond? There are so few like him these days. Don't try to ape him or dissuade me, darling, please. For now, I think of little else, although it's hopeless and it can't go on, I know. I lie here burning on our bed and think of Borneo. Thank you, and very, very much looking forward to the poems of Maskwork.
Thank you so much, Isabel, for that wonderful reading, for your rich melodic poetry, which moved us from so many Henrys, the right to break hearts, and answering primates, and love at first sight. It was such a wonderful reading. Thank you so much for being our guest this evening. And just to add as well, if you enjoyed Isabel's poetry, you can find a bundle of all 3 of her 9 Arches books available on our website, and there is a link in the chat to find that as well. So
buy Maskwork first.
And yes, also you can pick all of them up in the shop, and we have an autumn book bundle as well. So for any of these books, if you'd like to buy them, do just take a look. Thank you ever so much, Isabel. That was a wonderful reading. So for our final reading tonight, I'm going to invite Gregory Ledbetter to read from his new book, Maskwork. It's been a real delight to work with Gregory on Maskwork and to have seen the second collection coming together over the last few years. It is a book that is haunting, at times troubling, and yet deeply felt. These are intimate poems where mystery addresses absences and gaps in things. It's a kind of poetry that isn't afraid of exploring those spaces either, whether those are the spaces between natural and man-made things, between the living and the dead, or between the supernatural and the understood, the world that we have before us, the concrete world, or that shadowy stranger world in between. These are poems that often take us into interesting places via masks and disguises. Greg is very much a consummate poet, I feel, who has orchestrated a kind of magic within his work, which brings together mystery, theatre, ritual. These are rich, deep poems with so much in them to draw you as a reader in. They grant us access to other worlds, to hidden states within ourselves. And within Greg's poems, I think language itself becomes something bewitching, enchanting, powerful. He's had some really wonderful praise for his book. From Zafar Kunyal, who said the poems catch the imagination in unexpected ways. From Jim Crace, who said that Maskwork is an enthralling new collection. From Alice Fowler, who said these are the vital words that we need to hear right now. And Vidyan Ravindran, who said that to read Greg is to discover a cure for false realisms and to be reminded that language can make sense and unmake sense in unexpected ways. So we are very, very delighted this evening at 9 Arches Press. We're absolutely over the moon to be launching Maskwork. And I'm now going to ask Greg to read from the book. Take it away, Greg. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I think we counter, I unmuted just at the wrong moment there. Thanks so much, Jane, for that wonderful introduction and for publishing Maskwork in the superb way that you have. It's a huge privilege to be joined by Isabel and Patrick this evening for the launch. So thank you both for those exquisite readings, which were really superb. I'm going to start with the title poem for the book. So the title, I should say, was set last year. This is not a sort of topical title, and as you've been hearing, it's much more to do with the affinities between poetry and theatre and ritual than it is to do with anything to do with the virus whose name we shall not speak. Maskwork. To teach the mask I make to tell the truth, I wear it as my own. Feel its weight tilt when it sees the first earthly thing it loves suffer in its infant being. one mask passes to another, the face that it has learned. Still it makes no sound, even as its senses sow their trance where what would be its language grows. Only when my life has done its work and the mask knows more than I could say without its visage, then I take it off. It wears my voice. The mask speaks. This second poem I'll read is called Gramarye, and it's a wonderful old word, kind of a forgotten word really now, a word for learning, but learning of an occult or magical nature. And rather beautifully, the word gramarye is related to the words grammar, glamour, and grimoire. And I suppose the poem addresses that link between language and being. This one was also shortlisted for the Montreal Poetry Prize this year. Sadly, the 20,000 Canadian dollars didn't find their way to me, but they went to a good home, so we don't mind. Gramarye. I want speech that makes my skin more than the book I have made of its membrane, silent as lips at the mouth that leans from the air. And this is how that work in my flesh began. The desire that drew me like sap to its tip, where I hung by my voice from the whispering ash that grew in the garden it made of my death. For runes cut by the tongue to touch every beginning that is to come, to the egg from which I was born. I learned to know love by the names that I made, and the names took bodies of their own that glistered with the dust of their home, unblinking at the strangeness of what I had done in piercing their silence, sending my voice to open as an iris under their sun. They pluck it from the pulsing earth and come. I have woken to moonlight leaking from the wound, the skin that I speak with, fresh with the blood of its wish. I'm going to stay with the thinning of the veil with this next poem. It is the season here in Britain, after all. This poem is called A Poppet, which can be a doll, and is also a word for an effigy used in witchcraft. A poppet. When I dug you up like a potato, you could have been vegetable, grown in earth too long, lost by a girl who gave you her name and worried her parents to death with her love for your unstitched eyes, whose loose threads look into mine as I bath you until the water is black and your human hair is chestnut again, and the hemp sack of your skin is warm from the fire I nearly put you in. The embers are cold when I think I wake, to find you folded into my bed and your voice thrown to the tilth of my garden, growing you bone by bone with words no human breath could hold, biting my tongue and drawing blood that tastes wrong as I follow, now a father to a lost child, and feel small hands push me into fresh torn ground. When I think I wake, your small hands lift me out. Now to a poem that Isabel requested. And you know, I don't normally do requests, but since it's you, Isabel, I will do this. This is called Tree Script, and my poems are much concerned with the more than human world, as much as the human world and the interaction between them, the living ecology that we inhabit. And this poem distills its own lore from the lore of trees, and the relationship between tree lore and alphabet lore in particular, between the natural order and the ordering of language, the ordering power of language, the growth of the living world and the growth of language. Tree Script. Turn the key to the mouth in your hand, the wand in the leaves of your voice. Grown to your ear from the ground, to your eye from the bough that roots in the tilth of the sky. Let these be signs that grow with mind, where mind is sown. Apple. In flower, the first has the scent of all letters, the fruit and drunkenness of speech in the juice of its flesh at the lips. The first letter is a kiss. Cherry. Its blossom makes an Easter month that dances from itself. Fir. For birth, a conifer, an egg of many seed heads, balanced impossibly on its branch. Cedar of Lebanon. Each branch a tree to house a heaven and its shadow. Birch. A shadow spells with the ink of a moon until its fingers thin to twigs. Tap the pale skin and drink. Its blood is sweet. Blackthorn. A thicket hides a path and a girl who said, I'll go the blackthorn way. Rowan. She lights a fire at the leaf that songbirds swallow and burn as song. Hawthorn. What once was a hedge huddled between worlds is a fragrant sex. Ash. The black buds of morning unclasp. Lovers hang on beauty, open-mouthed. Beech. Eyes wake in their shimmering skin. A rack of antlers lifts from the mast as if the book of skin could speak. A temple rises from a knot of snakes. Lime. Its leaves are an acre of light for bees in the cloud of their wings. Its bark is the mass of a moth. Alder. Read the double that grows from the lip in the mirror of water. The topmost branch of this world whistles to the other. Willow. Its sprays are silver green whispers, twisted from the air to blow a word beyond its breath. The moon owns it. Oak. Walk through the midsummer door to wear the common crown that outlives any monarch. An oracle nests in your hair. Olive. Pour this tree along your body to glister like sap in the oil of the sun. The fishes of age grow young. Fig. Under the lobes of its leaves, the pendant head purples with sugars. Plain. A sage old as incarnation sloughs the fool of time in flakes. Sycamore. A hand gloved in honeydew falls from the ooze of the shade as if to follow the wing of a seed. Hazel. A shape swells in a green flame. The truth can be eaten straight from the stave. Elder. A balm for the living to revive the dead. They are crushed together in a black wine. Ivy. A white flower burst from a wreath, marrying leaf to leaf. Holly. Touch the tip of the green spine. The year with its head cut off is alive. Elm. The vanished letter is voiced in tacit. Poplar. The trembling torch of the light of day is passed underground by a buried hand. You. A figure blooms in the bleeding dark, brings your finger to her lips, begins to write. This next one, which will be the penultimate one. It might be the penultimate one. This next one is called Personal Computing, and really it's a coda included in this book, Maskwork, to a sequence that was included in The Fetch, my first book with Nine Arches Press, about my father and his illness and ultimately death caused by vascular dementia. But it's also about our relationship to technology, told through a personal history and the revolution we've lived through really since the late 70s. Revolution I've lived through. Personal computing. I slot the rewound cassette into the deck. Type load. Press play. The monitor flickers its glitch rainbow, begins to unscramble its data with a sound like a signal scratched from the depth of space. I am maybe 9 years old, and you, Dad, can't be far away. This is a Commodore 64, its console the color of praline fondant, the second computer in the quiet revolution you brought to our home, that for us had begun with the VIC-20, 20 kilobytes of read-only memory, new words with their strange promise, the hope hardwired in the dream of tech. And that, I think, is what you loved in these, the greater human good that we might make with them. The computer as a kind of friend to help our thinking grow. The next one you bought was the Amiga 500 with 1 megabyte and a built-in disk drive. And that felt like the future. The revolution got faster. After the Commodores, you built your own. But eventually, the Windows PC won out, leaving the house a clutter of computer archaeology. Look at us now. you and I might have discussed the quantum mechanics of dementia, how you can be here and not here at once. If I had kept those old computers, might they one day remake you from cells smudged from your thumb on the mold of your mouse, left-click your mind to life again? But it wouldn't be you. The future has come and gone. I am still watching the flickering screen, waiting for all we have lost to load. There are one or two elegiac pieces in the book, including one from my dear friend and neighbour, Andy Payne, and Andy's family, I think. Andy died in 2016. His family are possibly watching on the other side of the wall next door. Hello, Paynes, if you are. I'm going to end with kind of the capstone poem to the book, Consistori del Gai Saber. And there was a real Consistori del Gai Saber, the Consistory of Joyous Knowledge, which is rather wonderful. And this was a poetic academy for the cultivation of lyric poetry that was founded in Toulouse in 1323. This is not that academy, but it does address its own kind of ideal poetic academy. And this is dedicated to Philip Allott, Professor Philip Allott, Emeritus Professor of Public International Law at the University of Cambridge, one of my teachers and mentors. Consistori del Gai Saber. Tell those who come they have to find the sound of knowing for themselves, as I did 377 moons ago. It is nothing so fixed as the earth at the center of the spheres, which, mark me, is a truth that will loosen like a slip of the tongue. But the maker of fact, the spell that makes you a fiction, howbeit real. But I'm going too fast. It begins with overhearing the dead in the living. What else is a word but a ghost sent feeling its way? The centuries passed on your breath. And in this, the feet of surprise. When a stranger speaks and it sounds upon you a promise of being that it keeps as it touches the stem of your fate, something like a voice that you love. That is the invisible body of our wandering college, to which anyone can belong, if they choose. For me, born without money or precedent, but yes, loved, and my weird strong enough, one dead dictador became my teacher. The music in words can be its own song. I imagine him lit by brandy and candle, the room drunk, but for a moment on language, and he half aware that those who listen have not yet been born. Look for the signs that tell you the student has heard the dead and plays for them as they would for a friend. Look for signs that the dead have heard. This is not solemn. The Violetta d'Or has to be earned, as does the ear of those who come after. They, like the language, deserve our best benefaction. Listen, the golden oriole is back and arcs the air with his whistle. He is a joglar like me, the magus of this morning's tarok. Look how the hard at work and the self-absorbed alike ignore the pageant of his arrival. But let's not be doleful. There's a joke in the tragic mask of their loss, as old as laughter itself. Just as a prude is the dupe of sex, and the sober are fools of reason. Unwilling clowns are clowns nonetheless. Better to choose to play. Our students should have a stomach for paradox and impatience only with the absence of love. We have the freedom of fallen beings. Think not of fresco devils, nor huddled angels with blue-washed wings, but their nameless painter at work in the temple of their imagining. The art in the thought of transfiguring, who wears the horned brow of an ecstasy older than Christendom. Forgive my heresy, but we who perform have a habit of asking to be forgiven in the very trespass of our voice. We belong to no class but our calling. Our ways are promiscuous as language, over which we raise the sign of eros. When I speak, it's to kiss my absent lover, who may not even be human. I like a music that reaches where speech is forbidden unless it speaks in wonder. That is the beginning and the end of our learning. If you can hear my smile, it's because I savor the romance of knowledge, even the wound of its sounding. Listen, those spheres are moving. I have told you some secrets, maybe said too much, but I never forget my audience, nor those who might be overhearing. Come, step through this curtain and into the sun. The world is young. I find what I learn from the aureole pleasing. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, for an extraordinary reading. Those poems are both spellbinding and entrancing in so many ways. They are also full of mystery and mischief. They are full of knowing and knowledge in ways that are really so engaging and hard to forget once you've heard those poems. They just make you want to return to them. So we are absolutely delighted to have published Maskwork and really delighted to be launching it this evening. A great many thanks to everybody who's been joining us online. We have been reading your comments and we are looking out for your questions as well in the Q&A in the chat. So please do paste them into there if you have anything you'd like to ask our writers, because we'd really like to go into the final part of the evening now, which is a short Q&A with our writers Isabel Dixon, Patrick McGuinness and Gregory Ledbetter, who are all going to join me in just a second on the screen. So I invite all of our two guests and our guest poet tonight to join us. So we should all now be together on the screen. Thank you ever so much for all of your readings. It's just been such a treat to hear you read together. And while we're waiting for questions to come through from our audience, I wonder if I might be a little bit cheeky and ask the first question, if that's okay. And this is for Greg, but also for Isabel and Patrick. And it's about masks. And I know, Greg, that you the book was titled long before masks, in the sense that we're thinking of them currently, became such a central part of our everyday lives. And that the book really is about masks in terms of disguise, of drama, of what is revealed by perhaps wearing masks as well. So I was wondering about the function that masks play for us as writers, as poets, how we put on masks when we write. So I'd like to invite you all to answer that really, about the role and the sort of function of masks for you as poets.
Well, shall I start on that one? Yeah, I mean, for me, I suppose that the mask, certainly in the context of this book, is an organ of seeing a kind of medium for seeing what might otherwise remain unseen, in fact. And in that sense, it's kind of a revelation rather than something that obscures something. I think we're encouraged to push the imaginary, our lives as they exist in our own imaginations, to one side, really. But that's where a kind of access, a certain kind of access to reality, it's the only place that it can be achieved, I think. And the mask, in a sense, here, or the mask in which I've been thinking about it in relation to this book, is a mask in the sense that poetry itself is a mask, an enabling organ that gives us access to senses and ideas that we wouldn't otherwise have access to, I suppose. Yeah, so that's certainly how it's been functioning for me, and how I like to think of it, not as an obscuring, but as an enabling access to another world that is with us all the time, but doesn't necessarily get noticed or treated as such.
Isabella, would you like
to?
Sorry,
I was just I was thinking through what Greg was saying and absorbing that and thinking about that with the collection. Yeah, for me as well, I think that, I mean, poetry is a central part of my life, and it's always been a space of great liberation and exploration and freedom. It's I love the fact that you can speak in many different voices within the same collection, and you can discover things about yourself and the world through that imaginative shift, through thinking and speaking through other people. In the Tempest Prognosticator, I have a poem in which I always admit that I freely steal from the Victorian explorer Mary Kingsley, because when I read her words, she wrote so beautifully and extraordinarily, and the whole poem is composed really of her words, but together they form something slightly different. And just in terms of, I think about the page, the mask of the page, stepping behind the page, and the voice of the poem is also important to me on a personal level. You might hear it occasionally, but when I was young, I had a debilitating stammer, and poetry was another place of freedom in which to play with words and explore with words that wasn't an embarrassment and was a joy. And so, and later on, both the public speech and the poetry became a joy, but the public speech wasn't always a joy for me. So in that sense, poetry was both a mask and a liberation too.
Thank you, Isabel. Patrick.
As you'll have all heard from Greg's poems, Greg is interested in the moment where the mask becomes you and you become the mask, and the two join, and there's no longer a border between them. And the mask grows into your skin, and your skin grows into the mask. And I've always felt that was what writing was and what poetry was. I've actually got two masks up here on my wall, and I'm going to illustrate by. I hang the masks these two masks, right, on the old funeral lamp of the funeral cart that took my great-grandparents respectively to their funerals. So I mix the mask with the funeral lamp because it makes me realize that at some level, the mask is, as we all know, the place where we become ourselves. But if we're not careful, the mask becomes us and we're no longer ourselves. But that's, of course, the excitement. One of the things that I inadvertently ended up describing, I suppose, in the first poem that I read was, I'm just going to keep doing this, by the way, just to unnerve you.
Very unnerving.
Was the way in which every time we express ourselves, we feel both authentic and inauthentic. The part of us that makes poems or makes art and says deep things in a structured way feels both right and wrong. It's us and it's not us. And I suppose I was trying to get that across with the idea of dubbing. Dubbing is a kind of vocal mask. And what I was especially attracted to in Greg's poem about the mask was that the voice that isn't yours becomes yours. The face that isn't yours becomes your face. Your face joins onto it. And I feel that as somebody who began with a different mother tongue, and English is the mask, and speaking English and writing poems in English is the mask. And yet it's the only way I would ever express myself, through the mask. As you can probably tell by now, I'm quite enjoying wearing it. And I'm kind of giving you an illustration of what it's like to write poetry. And Greg said it, you know, it's real and it's not real. But if you're not careful, it gets stuck. And actually it's stuck, I can't get it off. So I'm just going to keep it on. I'm going to stop talking now.
Yeah, can I just add something there? I mean, there's something John Gray, the philosopher John Gray, said in his book Straw Dogs, which I kind of pounced on a few years ago when I read it. And he sort of distinguished between what he called unadorned reality and artful illusion. And he said you can't have both. Actually, I think that's wrong. My philosophy, if you like, is artful reality. You know, it's a fusion of those things. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking when Patrick was talking as well about your poem Europa, and that those lines about there are voices on the air, are they our own? That the other and us, you know, who is the other and who are we? And later in the poem, I think you say, we assemble in hope, as if in sight of ourselves, which kind of made me feel a little bit about us here, you know, people out there on Zoom, on YouTube watching. There were lines as well about in that lovely Consistori poem you read as well about the invisible body of our wandering college. Is that it?
Yeah.
To which anyone can belong if they choose. And just thinking about these, this space of where we're both taking on another role as poets and other voices in our poems, but in which we are really, if we, as writers, almost ourselves.
I'll add a very quick thing to what Isabel said, and it is, again, in relation to Greg's writing. There is always, all of us, every single one of us, at some level feels inauthentic when we shape language into poetry in a way that we don't necessarily when we shape it into prose. And so the mask, we already put the mask on even though it doesn't fit. And it's a process of fitting. And I don't think there's anything wrong, as Greg said, in relation to that fake opposition of John Gray's, who's usually right about most things. I don't think there's anything wrong with it's feeling wrong to begin with. Nobody feels right when they are shaping language into form. The reason we do it is that poetry is actually quite an unnatural thing. It's language's own mask, isn't it? It's language that has been hammered and smelted and fired and kind of sculpted into form. But language isn't naturally form. Language is usually silence or noise, scream. It's the inexpressible. So there's always a mask. I'm going to put it back on now. Yes, on it goes.
I actually think there's a long conversation about poetry and prose and feeling at home or not feeling at home and what the other, but we probably don't have time for that now.
I'm wishing now we'd all planned our masks far more carefully as well, because we could have. We should have.
I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna bring the fox. And just, yeah, I saw you left your fox mask on the shelf there. But yeah.
Thank you so much. I think it's such an interesting topic, and I think we could talk almost all night just about masks and their role and how they work for us as writers and as humans and our interactions between things, what they allow us to do. It's such a fascinating conversation. But we've also had some lovely questions coming in from our audience too, so I'd like to ask a couple of those. This one is for Greg, and it's from Steve Harrison. He says, it was lovely to listen to you reading and following in the book. He wonders how Greg's writing developed as the technology for computers changed, or were the early computers just used for games?
Thank you, Steve, and hello. Yeah, it's funny. I think as a child, because of course my first encounter with computers was as a child. I was very much interested in just the game side of thing, and I remember this was to the disgust of some of my relatives. Not so much my dad, although he wasn't so interested in games. He did eventually buy a joystick. You remember those? Yeah, feels, I don't know, you know, I won't do the actions, but anyway, and he bought a couple of those because I think he broke one or two in frustration at certain games. But you know, he wasn't a violent man. But yeah, so as a child, I was very much interested in games. And I remember going around to one of my relatives' houses, and he was also an early computer programmer. And I remember asking him, "Have you got any games?" And he went, "Games? Games? Games?" But anyway, there we go. I can imagine it was quite annoying, given that all computers can do, as we now know, games. Although games are sort of coming, I'm rambling now, but games have sort of come into their own, haven't they, in recent years? And I think there's so much work being done on games, almost as a, you know, the cognitive dimension of gaming is much more to the fore now. So I think that's interesting in itself. But for me, I still write longhand, you know. So poems, I will write down longhand first, generally. I mean, I have my notebook that's kind of moved onto my iPad. Yeah, that's moved onto the iPad because it is really convenient being able to access those ideas from a variety of locations, I suppose. So yeah, my writing practice has grown up with it, but I still really like that connection between the hand and the brain that you have when you're physically writing, because it reminds me of drawing. And in a way, I think my writing grew out of my early love of drawing.
Isabel and Patrick, are you computer poetry writers, or are you longhand notebook poetry writers, or a little bit of both?
When I started, I thought the only authentic poetry could come from the contact of fountain pen nibbed to paper. Now I tend to compose straight onto the computer, though I have a fountain pen here, but that's more in a kind of, you know, artisanal form than anything else. I don't know, I find it very difficult to see the poem till it's typed. I'm not a big manuscript fetishist.
Yeah, I mean, I take loads. I'm always scribbling notes. I have like hundreds of notebooks with different postcards on the front, so I can remember which is which. And that's a mixture of my work life and poetry life. But those are more the notes. And I then also, because in that other life, I used to travel a lot. And you didn't want to have left the crucial draft that you'd begun somewhere else. So my drafts tend to move quite quickly from paragraphs in the notebook onto drafts in the computer and the laptop, and go with me on Dropbox wherever I go.
Can I ask a related question to that then? Do you actually use your notes? Because I love the idea of notebooks, and I keep buying them, and then I fill the first 2 pages and then I forget them, and then I buy another notebook.
No, I fill mine full, and I have a system because I do my work, my publishing life from the front on, and I do my poetry life from the back in, like Hebrew.
Okay, so you've got
And
it
then
all the
I can
time.
tell how busy it's been and how my admin brain has taken over my life by where they meet. But what I do often is when I'm looking for, if I'm feeling restless or a new way into writing, then I go and pluck one off the shelf and look at the back. I have, ideas for titles, ideas for notes, but usually I've got so many other poems I'm trying to fix that.
And you have several, well, Greg, this is for you too. Do you have several on the go, open, that you go back to?
Notebooks.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, so I still do have physical notebooks, and I use those more for drafting now. In terms of ideas, I write down a lot of ideas. In fact, scarily, I did the word count on my kind of digital notebooks, and I appear to be writing about 100,000 words every 2 years into those things, which is kind of alarming. But I think, well, no wonder I can't get anything done, because that's what I'm doing. I'm living this inchoate life.
Writing notes, not enough time writing poems.
Well, there you go. Yeah, it's the inchoate life, but there's a lot to be said for the inchoate life, where you're constantly, it wouldn't be right if I did.
If you were a European poet, which you are, I mean, spiritually, if not necessarily legally and in terms of national belonging any longer, you would see that the note and the prose note has got a big value. You know, the French, the Germans, the Spanish, the Italians, for them, the prose note is a thing in itself. It's only in Anglo cultures, maybe because we're obsessed with the capitalist end product, that the poem at the end is the thing. The French are always reading notes. The carnet is a big genre. I've got stacks of them here. They don't make such a distinction between the finished product and the stuff that leads to it. And actually, I don't think that today's poets in English should do the same either. I mean, we ought to be much more fluid about the interchange between the note and the poem.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to be said on this. Again, should we do a whole series of seminars? Actually,
I mean, these are such good questions, and we've got a few more coming in from our audience. They're absolutely wonderful questions. I'm going to move on to a question from Amelie Daucher, who says, wonderful context from her as well. She says, someone may need to call an ambulance. I still feel very disturbed after a poppet. It's a great poem. The question then for Greg from Amelie is, how did a poppet originate? Could you give us some context, please, unless this question is a blatant heresy, of course?
Well, thank you, Amelie, and hello. Context. It's always tricky, isn't it? Because the poem sort of, it does have an umbilical relation to all of these elements that go into it, but it becomes its own thing. But I suppose, well, I mean, I could trace it to the Museum of Witchcraft in the village of Boscastle in Cornwall, which, if you haven't visited, I would heartily recommend that you do. It's got a number of poppets, historical artifacts of these effigies that were used in witchcraft. And they're very memorable objects and striking things to find yourself having an encounter with. That said, I think there's a few other things feeding into that poem, because there is a sort of exchange, almost an existential exchange going on in that poem as well. And I'm very interested in that. I'm not sure what else I can add, but it's a bit of a mystery to me. I mean, this is the truth of these things, is that actually sometimes, you compose them, but you're really following you get yourself into very odd states of mind and feeling, or I do anyway, when I'm composing. And it's a matter of working with the unknown as much as anything. So you're moving by tact through the relationships that are being suggested by the words that you're using. So all of the time, there are new and surprising things happening during the process of composition, which means that the process is always one remove from explanation, in a sense, I suppose. And I think that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, isn't it? That idea of how much we understand when we're composing as well. For me, certainly very true in terms of writing, is that I don't think we always are. You know, there's something happening that's beyond us quite often when we're writing, and then there are moments obviously when we're completely deliberate and things, but I think there are also times when things are happening that we're not fully in control of. It is slightly like ghostwriting at points. Your hand feels like it's being moved by something else. So I think there's a real connection. And really, again, we could have a whole other seminar on this topic alone, on what on how conscious or unconscious some of the things in our writing are, and where they come from. That kind of beautiful line of Heaney's, which is somewhere in one of his essays about the pebble dropped into a well and the ripples, and how that sense of something far removed but also very, very close, and that the resonance of things is a really important one for me. I think we've probably got time for one more question. So I wanted to ask, this question comes from Nuno Carvalho, who asks, my question for Greg would be that Maskwerk seems to have been drawn from mysticism and mythology, since you mentioned the grimoire. Any particular myths or legends that have influenced the collection? And I'll extend this a little bit as well by asking Isabel and Patrick also to perhaps to mention a couple of myths or legends that have influenced their work. But Greg, would you like to?
I'm very interested. I mean, there's a tension in the use of myth, I suppose, and this distinction isn't always made clear, but it's one I'd like to make clear in responding to Nuno's question. And the distinction is, I suppose, between what Philip Larkin sort of dismissed as the myth kitty, you know, just sort of these allusions to myth in order to bring in something ready-made into the poem. I'm not so keen on that necessarily, although I do use allusion, and allusion is an interesting thing in itself and not to be sniffed at. But I'm also interested in the process of myth making, so the mythopoetic, and particularly the fusion of lyric and myth, which are often contrasted categories, actually. I'm interested in bringing those together in the making of a new kind of lyric myth. But there are certain mythic patterns that I just have been drawn to in the stories, in our established mythologies that, you know, that I had access to as a child and as a teenager. The Odinic myths in Norse mythology in particular, hanging on the tree for 9 nights to learn the secret of the runes. The severed head of Orpheus singing. And in fact, the head cult that seems to be in evidence from the Bronze Age archaeological record in Europe and elsewhere, that features, I suppose, here and there. Yeah, so the Orphic, I mean, in the poem Metaphysician, which I didn't read this evening, although I did at the Birmingham Literature Festival event we did on the 1st of October, which is available on the Nine Arches Press YouTube channel, and which has just been released as a poem film, which I would you know, humbly urge you to watch, because something lovely's happened with that. Thank you to Helen Dewberry, who I think is still with us here. In there, I make reference to Chiron, the centaur healer and teacher, and that does serve a purpose that is sort of incorporated into the mythopoeia of the poem. So I'm using the myth, but I'm also subordinating that to the myth-making process, I suppose, of the poem itself. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Greg. Did Isabel or Patrick, did you have anything to add? Favourite myths, myths that have maybe informed, or mythology that's maybe informed your work, or legends that you found particularly you've responded to in your writing?
I think when it comes to my iconography and things that I reach for, you know, you'll find more Alfred Hitchcock and Fred Astaire and you know, Shakespeare, John Berryman, Elizabeth Bishop, Emily Dickinson. I think there's, you know, those are the voices that resonate. But I think the thing that resonates most with me is all the ways that writers have dealt with the ecological and nature and the creaturely, which is why I asked for trees as, you know, the tree poem, and loved. By the way, thank you so much, Greg, for reading that. It's so beautiful. And I think often poets are hesitant to read the long poem in their collection because they feel they're taking up space and time. But you absolutely deserve to take up space and time on your launch night and your Zoom launch night, this specific reading night. And thank you so much. That was beautiful to hear that resonant and echoey whisper of the breeze of poetry through all those different trees. So that was my answer, and I want to hear Patrick's.
Well, you've come to the right place. I don't really believe in any myths, really. I used to believe in the myth of progress, but reality cured me of that. And I'm kind of taken by the way Greg writes poetry, because Greg is able to find a way of writing about the mythical or the kind of continuously spiritual without pretending that it somehow transcends reality. And that's quite a difficult note to catch at the moment. And of course it comprises the ecological and so on, but I suppose what I would like to believe in but don't, or I do intellectually, but I'm not in my heart drawn to it, is the kind of way of seeing the world that Greg has, which actually I think is very hopeful, which is a sense of connectedness, that if we could find the right place in ourselves, everything would make sense. And I have many doubts about that, and maybe that's why he's a poet and I'm not. Not anymore. But Greg has found a place in the culture and a way of articulating these things that is not either just pure, isn't nature great, we need to save it, and also conversely, countervailingly, not just isn't our spiritual self fantastic, we must let it free. And he's kind of on the fulcrum of something that I think is really exciting and really good. And it takes quite a lot to get to that position. And it's his position. So that was the long answer. The short answer is no, I don't believe in any mythology, and I think it shows. But thank you, and thank you, Greg, and thank you, Jane. It's an incredible honor to be doing a Nine Arches event with Greg and with Isabel, and to be part of what Nine Arches is doing, which is actually mythical in its ambition and scale and success. So I am really happy and pleased to be in this way part of it. So thank you for asking me.
Thank you.
It's a joy to be here too. What an honor, Greg. Thank you for inviting us. It's I always feel a bit like an interloper at someone else's launch, and it's just such a such a joy and honor to be here for the book, and as a Nine Arches comrade, and all the great things Jane does.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That's a really lovely note on which to bring our evening to a close. I'd like to say a very big thank you to Patrick and to Isabel for being our wonderful guests, to Greg for his beautiful readings, and with many congratulations on the publication of Maskwork, to our lovely audience who have been joining us on YouTube. We've been reading your comments. Thank you so much. I'm sorry if I didn't get to your questions, but thank you very much for asking them. It's just been brilliant to have you here as part of this event, gathering with us around the glow of your computer screens as if we're around some kind of digital campfire. It feels like a really special place to be, and I think in this time of kind of strange isolation and separation from each other, it's a really valuable and lovely thing to gather around. And thanks also to my colleague Angela Hicken, who in the background has been doing lots of things to make this event possible, feeding your questions through to us and helping us to manage the event and running the tickets and all sorts of things. So a huge thank you to Angela for everything she does. And just to say, if you would like to buy Greg's book, it is for sale in our bookshop, and we can pretty much post it directly to you tomorrow. So if you want it for the weekend, I wouldn't advise going to that big website that begins with A. I would definitely come to the Nine Arches Press one. We can very definitely make sure you get those books quite quickly. So do pop over and have a look. Isabel's book's also for sale there. It is a really hard time for lots of independent publishers and independent bookshops, especially as well at the moment. So any support you can give us is really appreciated, and the support you give to our writers who have lost their festival appearances and live events in person this year in quite a big way is very much appreciated. So thank you for joining us. I'd like to say a final thank you to our readers, and what we're going to do now is we're going to all applaud, we're going to cheer, and then we will vanish from your screens. Thank you ever so much for joining us, everybody. Thank you, Greg, Isabel and Patrick. Stay well, everybody, and we'll see you very soon at the next Nine Arches Press event. Thank you very much. Good night and take care.